Akademiks can't ride no wave.
Question is whether what happened was murder or self-defense. We're one of the only media outlets in the courtroom giving you all the details of what is happening in real time. I'll also tell you why a witness's testimony caused the family of the victim, Austin Metcalf, to step out today. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Days of testimony from prosecution witnesses. The defense called Anthony's track coach as its first witness, and from the moment he took the stand, jurors heard a different account of what happened in the moments leading up to the deadly confrontation. All right, before we jump into Karmelo Anthony's side of the story, I want to get with Court TV's Cody Thomas inside the courtroom once again today. Cody, let's talk about how the state finished their case, and they call a witness today who's kind of the link between Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf. He was teammates with Austin Metcalf, knew Karmelo Anthony to some extent. His name is Eddie. Why was his testimony important?
So we've heard this Eddie character's name, Chris, throughout the entire duration of all the student witnesses that have taken the stand. He is the common denominator. We heard a lot of people saying Karmelo knew Eddie. He came over and dapped Eddie up, gave him a handshake. Eddie was a childhood friend of Karmelo's now ex-girlfriend. So that's the connection there. Now, based on all the testimony that the students brought up during the prosecution's case, they were all saying that Eddie and Karmelo looked like they knew each other. It was the obvious link. That's what the defense kind of talked about in their opening statements. Of course, some people under the tent said they didn't know who Karmelo was, but they looked over, he was sitting next to Eddie. Everything came back to this guy named Eddie. All right. So I was thinking, as I've been sitting there for the past few days, that Eddie was going to be a defense witness, because if he's great friends with Karmelo, then obviously, he'd fend for his friend, I would say. But one thing I was thinking before he got called was, if he knew Karmelo, why wouldn't he stand up and let everybody know, when all the commotion started, hey, this is my friend, he's here with me, blah, blah, blah. Everything's cool. But never heard that from any of the students' testimony. But anyway, Eddie gets on the stand today. They're going through his testimony. He's about 5 or 10 minutes in. And then Eddie kind of all but says he knew who Karmelo was. They were cool, but he verbally said, I wouldn't say we were friends. It was just kind of someone that he knew. Okay, cool. Now we move on to the cross-examination by the defense. And this is, I feel, was a little bit of a win for the defense. They showed a whole bunch of pictures of Eddie and Karmelo at these different group settings, at Eddie's house, no less. There was 50th birthday parties for Karmelo's ex-girlfriend's mother. Remember, Eddie and the girlfriend, this girl named Valeria, they were the ones that knew each other, and Karmelo was, I guess, the third party, you would say. So when they had these family functions, Karmelo obviously was there. Okay, they showed some group photos, kind of establishing. And then, here's another defense win to me today. They showed photos of Karmelo and Eddie together, just being teenagers goofing off. One is playing a guitar, they're making silly faces at the camera. So Eddie gets up there under direct examination saying, yeah, I know him, but, I wouldn't say he's a friend. But then the defense pushes back and is like, hey, if you're not friends, why do you have all these pictures together? But the crux of Eddie's testimony today, though, Chris, was that he definitely got emotional talking about Austin's death. He said Austin was like a brother to him. He said that on the stand. And when he was describing, everything that he saw that day, when he came back and saw Austin had a hole in his chest, he immediately choked up and started crying instantly. They had to walk up there and give him Kleenex. And there were some new people in the gallery today, Chris. There were 5 young boys, presumably former teammates, former classmates of Austin Metcalf's. And when they were describing that as well, 3 of those 5 boys started crying themselves. And, these are, big football player-esque guys, and they were crying too, just showing the emotional weight that this still carries. And, Karmelo sitting there, he's taking it all in. I'm looking at him on his at his table with his defense as this testimony is going on, still sitting there stoic. I don't know what's going through his head. I'm sure he's realizing the gravity of what's going down, but his defense, the state rested today. So his defense is up, and they've called 3 witnesses so far, 2 students included, one of those being one of Karmelo's friends too.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of time spent for both the prosecution and the defense kind of establishing like why Karmelo Anthony was under this tent, because from the state's perspective, they've hammered this like tent culture of track and field where it's like you don't go under the tent of another school. But then with this Eddie character coming into play, like the defense is really trying to show that like Karmelo may have been invited under the tent. That's why he's there. I wonder just how much any of that matters, because I just think of like if you're a juror, it's like, when do you enter like the bubble of the information that matters, of like the interaction when we talk about things escalating to the point where Austin Metcalf, maybe it's a hard shove, maybe it's a soft shove, that happens. And then you have Karmelo Anthony responding with this stab wound that eventually takes Austin Metcalf's life. And that kind of leads to a witness that came, one of the final witnesses for the state today, the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy on Austin Metcalf. And before we talk about that part of it, I know you've been sitting kind of near the family of Austin Metcalf. And I know there's been body cam video, there's been 911 calls. I mean, it's just the weight of what they're going through. It's just hard to imagine. What did you see prior to that witness being called?
So, the student witnesses wrap up, and there was this sort of announcement. All the media, as you mentioned, we're all sitting behind Austin Metcalf's family. All 9 members of the media are behind them. So before this medical examiner comes up, there's an announcement that she's going to be the next witness, to which the prosecution turns around. If you don't want to see or hear about any of these things, I'd advise you to leave the courtroom, because now you're about to get into, the injuries and talking about them. And I was sitting there thinking we were going to see the injuries. We didn't. The jury got to see 4 pictures of it, but us in the gallery did not see those things, but they were describing it in detail. So anyway, the prosecution announces medical examiner's coming in. If you don't want to hear any of this, go out. Austin Metcalf's mom gets up and goes out immediately, along with some other family members and some people in their camp as well. His dad, Jeff Metcalf, initially said no. He nodded his head. I was sitting right behind him. He said he didn't want to leave. And then the prosecutor kind of makes a face and just goes, I advise you to leave. I could hear it was kind of a whisper. It wasn't, an announcement. It was more so a direct to him, to which Jeff Metcalf finally got up and left. And, we heard about this 2-inch gaping wound. She described gaping, and she described the difference between gaping and a slit style stabbing wound. Where gaping is more of, it's kind of like filleted open, not to be insensitive to it, but that's the way she kind of described it on the stand. And that it was a 2-inch deep wound that hit the cartilage of Austin Metcalf's sternum and actually pierced one of the ventricles in his heart. So he was literally stabbed in the heart, which is likely why the CPR and life-saving efforts weren't working, because no matter how much the heart was pumping out, it was leaking, from the source. So it was really establishing the gravity of the wound. And the jury, again, got to see 4 pictures. 2 of them were Austin Metcalf on the autopsy table, and 2 of them were the heart removed from the body. That's what the medical examiner was describing they were seeing. So, of course, I'd imagine that a family didn't want to hear that. So mom, dad, and some other people, I don't know who they were, maybe the aunts and uncles, maybe it's just family, friends, and supporters of the Metcalf family. They all got up and left, about 7 or 8 of them.
And I wonder too.
So I know you might be wondering why we're still watching this. I'm trying to have an opinion on this. Based on everything I know and I've heard, they get in this argument, get from under our tent. No, I'm not. Dude is probably like, get from under my tent. Yo, chill out. I'm not going nowhere. Then it turns into, yo, don't touch me. And then the guy, I guess he pushes him or something of the sort, or I don't know if he punches him. And then the knife comes out. There's thoughts of maybe this kid was getting bullied. There's thoughts of, maybe he was only told to get out of there because maybe of his race, even though they're claiming it's the culture of like track meets where like, no, this is our tent. Like we don't have the fucking other team sharing our tent. I don't know. It feels like, obviously it's a racial thing, but it's kind of tough, if you ask me, to justify him murdering the guy. It's tough. Unless there's something I'm not seeing, right? Did the guy have a weapon too? Was he getting jumped? I don't know. I'm looking for those details.
Too, I know from the first responders who were there, the people who interacted with Karmelo Anthony right after all of this took place, where it seemed like...
So are y'all going with the bullying angle, that he was getting bullied and that was his fight back? Well, that's also a defense if you go down that route. But that might also... Well, you could probably run that with a self-defense defense. Yeah. I'm wondering, did they do that? Did they go with this bullying angle? Because usually in domestic violence cases, when a woman kills a man, so say a woman ends up stabbing a guy, they usually look for like crime of passion, or they'll look for, she was getting constantly beat by her husband and she snapped, insanity or something of the sort, to kind of, take the sting off the murder charge. But even then, like, you know, based on some of these circumstances, if maybe there was some blurriness or haziness in the evidence or in the situation, period, I'm wondering why manslaughter wasn't the thing and it was just straight up murder. The jury must have thought they got overwhelming evidence from the prosecutor, or the defense didn't do anything at all to convince them that it's not murder. And that's what they put down in terms of the verdict. The verdict was for murder.
He didn't think that what had happened was going to lead to Austin Metcalf's death. But then you hear about, I mean, the medical examiner, I think, straight up said something along the lines of, like, there's no way that he could have survived this. You know, even if he was on an operating table, like, a surgeon might not have been able to save him. The wound was that bad.
It absolutely was that bad. And those are the exact words that she said. And then one word that stood out to me, Chris, that she said, you know, she starts describing the 5 manners of death, and to which she, you know, classified this one as a homicide. And when she explained homicide to the jury, she said the intentional, bringing about of death by another human being. But the key word to that, to me, was, Chris, and I thought the prosecution would harp on a little bit, was intentional. You know, it wasn't like accidental. It wasn't this and that. She said the intentional causing of harm that results in death by another human being. So I thought that was a powerful thing, that she said on the stand.
And you just wonder, too, like, a statement like that, just that one line. And then I also know from some of these student witnesses who have just very...
Okay, I feel like I need to hear maybe another opposing view. I would love to hear someone who is pro Karmelo Anthony, because right now we know he's guilty. But I would love to hear someone who's pro Karmelo Anthony kind of explain why, in their opinion, they would believe. Again, I haven't kept up with the case that much to be able to, like, 100% lock down an opinion either or. Right now, I am kind of reacting and kind of feeling like I'm on the side of, you know, the nature of the injury, the stabbing. Even if he was bullied, he was going to go to jail for something. You know, I think manslaughter would have been a lucky thing. But if someone is bullying you or they push you or whatever, and you just stab them to death, anyway.
Very bluntly said they don't believe that this is self-defense. We're going to talk about the defense side of things here in a moment, and kind of from Karmelo Anthony's perspective, what they're trying to say. But you just wonder.
Okay, let me get to the defense side of things.
Which, valid if he did. So this coach gets up there and he's talking about how Karmelo was this athlete who's on the football team, and they presented an exhibit of what they call the Captain's Awards at his school, to which you see Karmelo's name engraved as the captain in 2024 during his fall senior season. And they also pointed out that that is voted upon by the students, pretty much trying to show that, you know, Karmelo Anthony is a reputable guy. He's somewhat of a leader. He looks like a leader to his classmates and his teammates. So they talked about that for a little bit, and then they got into the we've heard the tent culture. That was what a lot of this has been, that phrase has been circulating around in the courtroom, talking about each tent is like each locker room for each team. Therefore, people should not be hanging under the tents. Well, this coach was saying, I get that, but at the same time, I guess it's the discretion of each coach. Whereas we had the coach from Memorial High School, that was the absolute first witness the second witness by the prosecution, talking about how, strict he is and how, he enforces his rules. And we had that several student witnesses talk about how Coach Robert Starr, that's the coach for Memorial High School, has been strict. It's garnered some laughs inside the courtroom when they talk about how strict he was. But this coach here today was saying, there was times where athletes from another school would come under my tent when I'm there and, ask if they could be there. And I was like, yeah, we'll chill out and watch the 200 meters. But what the prosecution harped on during that, when they got under cross-examination, was, he specified when you were there as a coach, as a supervising individual versus, just the teenagers running free, because this coach also specified that they like to have a coach at the tents at all times just to watch teenagers, not thinking about crimes. You got boys, you got girls, you got a lot of hormones. You want to keep everything in line with a bunch of teenagers. So, started off with, positivity for Karmelo, which obviously his side is in support of. But when it got to cross-examination, it just seemed like the prosecution was just ready for everything that this coach had to say and tried to dispute anything that was being said.
Yeah,
okay. All right. We might have to circle back on this. I know the verdict just came down. We're getting a lot of other people kind of chiming in, but we will come back to this.